My name's Kit Turpin, and today we're going to talk about ethics. Sales and ethics, and sales from an ethical foundation. We'll talk for a while about the foundations of ethics, that there are actually two different wings of ethics. Oh, before I get started, my wife and I were recently out on the East Coast, and we stopped by a mortuary, a graveyard, to read some of the gravestones. And we walked up to one, and it said, "Here lies John Patrick, an attorney and an honest man." And my wife looked at me and she says, "I thought you could only bury one person in a grave." So we'll talk a little bit today, or a lot today, about ethics in sales and even broader, ethics in your life and why that's important. I'll ask you a question. Are you doing good in your work? It's an important question for you to take to heart and think about. Are the things that you're doing helping society, yourself, your family, all of those things? Are you doing good work? It was interesting, as I was studying ethics and building this class, the point came up about consistently reviewing ethics and consistently reviewing what your thoughts are of what is ethical or not ethical. Why, I'll ask you, did we grow up saying the Pledge of Allegiance in elementary school? I assume a lot of elementary schools are still doing that. I know they all aren't. But why? I mean, once we had memorized it, we had that, right? We knew what the Pledge of Allegiance was. So why were we asked to pledge each and every morning, 5 days a week, as we went to school? Okay? Same kind of thing. Why is it the Cub Scouts say the Club Scout oath at basically all of their meetings? And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it goes like this. "On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country, and to obey the Scout law, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight." Now, once you've memorized that, you got it, right? Well, maybe not so. That pledge, the Pledge of Allegiance, those types of things need to be consistently rehearsed and restated for us to continue to act on them. There's something about going over something over and over again that makes it part of how we act and interact with people. Thus the pledge, thus the Boy Scout oath. I'm a Rotarian. I've been in the Rotary Club for 25 years. And they have a four-step process talking about, is it the truth? But there were four other measures in the four-way pledge that goes through, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? Now, you can't just say, is it the truth, and leave it there. Because a lot of things are the truth, but you may not want to state them because it will harm somebody. So will it be fair to all concerned? Will it build better friendships? So after going through all four steps, possibly it may help you make a better decision, a better ethical decision about a difficult situation that you're working on. So I like the four-way test. It's been helpful to me in several situations in my life, helping clarify how I should act or how I should interact with others when there was a difficult situation. To go further on, why do we go to church every Sunday, those of us who do? I mean, once you get it, what's the purpose of continually going every Sunday? Well, it's along those same ethical thoughts that we need this repeated to us over and over again in order for us to work in ethical and principled ways. So church is a big foundation for ethics. And here, after we talk about the foundations of ethicals, I'll try to rope that back in and bring it back in a little tighter with what about sales? And how do sales come about from an ethical foundation? Oops. If I asked you, who do you see, if I asked you about what a used car salesman might look like? And these are great depictions in movies lately of salespeople. Ned Ryerson, the life insurance agent, in Groundhog Day. Richard Dreyfuss and Danny DeVito in Tin Men. I mean, if you are a salesperson, these are a couple of movies that are just great for how it probably shouldn't be done. In The Incredibles, that was just a great depiction of a claims person for an insurance company where Mr. Incredible has to turn this poor lady down on a claim, and how he's justifying it at first and then finally realizes, no, I need to help her get through this claim and get this claim paid. But it absolutely made me giggle. This is Woody Allen in The Meaning of Life. And he actually describes hell as having a life insurance agent describe to you the differences between whole life and term insurance for eternity. That's what hell is. So a couple of really good, fairly recent, Woody Allen wasn't, but the other ones were pretty recent movies, with the public perception of a salesman or salesperson and what it should or shouldn't be. The only thing you got in the world is what you can sell. And the funny thing is, you're a salesman and you don't know that. That's from Arthur Miller's The Death of a Salesman. And it's really honestly true. My dad, who was a salesman, used to tell me, nothing happens until something gets sold. And it's true. That's the motivating factor that has to happen to engage virtually anything to take place. And even though you may not perceive of yourself as a salesperson, you are. Life is all about that. It's all about selling. It's about selling your ideas to others. It's about selling things that you want to change, things that you want to stay the same, and why. Even if you're working for a large corporation and you're just in a cubicle, you're still going to have ideas that you want presented so that you can make things better or you can change things. You're going to have to sell those ideas. We're all sales people. Part of doing this class was reading several books on sales and ethics. And I read a book by an author, Daniel Pink, and the title is To Sell is Human. And it's a great book. If you'd like to read it, it's very well written. It's not a lot of technical jargon, but it just very straightforwardly says, sales is just part of what we do as being human. We sell to others and others sell to us. Ideas, information, products, all of that. That's just how this thing we're going through, that's how it works. All right. Oops. So ethics. It can basically be studied on two levels. Philosophically, where a code of personal ethics helps you gain personal and professional satisfaction. And that's where we're getting to today. That is the idea I'd like to bring to you, is a way to help improve how you sell, who you are, and what is your foundation, ethically and morally, okay? Or you could study ethics practically, where a code of personal ethics helps you to avoid controversy and misunderstanding and increases your personal efficacy as an insurance agent. So we're going to want to do that too. So we're going to study a little bit or go a little bit deeper philosophically and practically with ethics and how they affect you. Ethics technically seeks to resolve questions of human morality. Good versus evil, right, wrong, virtue and vice, justice and crime. And right now out there in the streets across this nation, we are questioning that. Justice. What is justice? And what is crime? As the riots throughout America are happening in many of the larger cities, even in this city, in Albuquerque, we're looking at what is justice. And you can see what the reactions are from people if they feel justice is not being handled properly. And then what is crime? When do you cross the line, and where is that? These are serious things that we're looking at all the time. And it's affecting us as a country and a lot of us as individuals. There are 5 areas of ethical issues. The first one is informed consent. So people need to know what is going to happen or what it is. Maybe it's a product that you're selling. But informed consent ethically is very important. Beneficence. Interesting word. It means do no harm. Nothing that you're doing should harm another person. That's beneficence. Respect for anonymity. Confidentiality. When I was going through the 4-way test and we talked about, is it the truth? Well, something may be the truth, but then it may harm somebody because you took something that was confidential and you put it out in the public where it didn't belong. So confidentiality is a big area of concern when you're talking about ethics. And respect for privacy follows right along there. The 5th issue in ethics is a respect for a person's privacy. This has everything to do with HIPAA laws and, gosh, what's happening now on the internet. You can post things about people or businesses, and you must be very, very careful to keep privacy where privacy belongs, so that you don't say something or show something that should not be out there. That's an ethics issue, of course, and boy, it's just getting bigger and bigger. A lot of agencies have their own handbook, and it says what can and cannot be done on social media and where you should go. If you don't have that and you'd like some of that information, I know the Independent Agents Association, who's doing this ethics class, We'll be happy to help you find some of that information for you. There's also university studies. You can get a PhD in ethics, believe it or not. The Wharton School of Business in Pennsylvania, one of the most prestigious business schools in the nation, has an entire PhD program on ethics, if you wanted to go and take that. Thomas More University in Kentucky, that has a PhD program, and the Santa Clara University, I think that's a Jesuit school. It's in San Jose. Driven by the campus, it's beautiful. They have a PhD program in ethics. So if you like what you're hearing in this and it fascinates you, might be something that you'd like to do some more studying on. It certainly couldn't hurt you to do a little bit of work on ethics. Always good for you. Okay. What is an ethical or moral foundation? So I believe one must learn and practice an ethical virtue in professional self-awareness as a part of their second nature. So you don't always have to ask your question, should I or shouldn't I do this? Eventually, if you're working enough with that, it'll be easier to make a decision. But it also needs to be practiced, like the pledge, like an oath that you take, or many of the other things that are routine are really there to create a second nature of ethical behavior for you. So what is an ethical or moral foundation, and where does it come from? You know, when my kids were little, my mother-in-law, she would come to visit, and I loved my mother-in-law. She was a great gal, but she was always driven to get the lowest price and the cheapest thing she could find. So she would tell my kids, and I would hear her lecturing them before we went into a movie theater, tell them you're under 5, tell them you're only 4, and that kind of thing. And I'd have to come up to her and say, Peggy, we don't do that. We don't tell the kids to say things that aren't true, ever, even if it will save $2, okay? And she's a great gal. But I think consistency is really, really important when you're young and you're growing up. And I believe part of the responsibility of parents is to be as consistent as possible. If you don't ever tell somebody that it's okay to lie or do something dishonest, it'll be a lot easier as they get older as adults to lecture them or to talk to them about something that comes up, okay? So unlike Grandma Peggy, we're not going to get a free meal at Village Inn because the kids are 4 or under, or whatever the special was for that. You know, my son was a wonderful kid, and I felt like he was always trying to do the right thing. You get this sense from kids. You know, some kids, they want to draw the line. My youngest, you draw a line, she's going to step right across it. My son was a little different. He always wanted to stay in bounds and do what he thought was the best or most right thing that he could. Well, as kids will do, at some point, he stole something from a store. He went in there not with the intent, but it was something he wanted, and Mom, he was pretty sure, I think, is not going to buy that for him, so he takes it and he puts it in his pocket. So we get home and find out that he's got candy, extra candy that he's stolen from this store. Well, we pile him into the car and we race back to that store, and I go into the manager that's sitting there and I said, all right, my son stole something. I want you to tell him how wrong this is and that he could get in serious trouble. Now the manager was not a good actor. And my son, as he brought up the candy bar and said, sir, I stole this, but I'm so sorry. he says, "Oh, that's okay, son. You go ahead and take it. It's all right." And I had to go back around behind him and say, "Oh, no, don't do that. He's supposed to learn that this is wrong and we never do this, okay? So at least act like he's not supposed to do this." So he did, but not very well. So his mom and I basically ended up lecturing and lecturing, whereas we were hoping that the store manager would have helped us with that project. But yeah, that's just part of what it's like, raising kids. I was really lucky as a young man. My grandfather lived at the end of the block, which was about four houses away. And when he got done from work, he would always come down to our house and he would take us for walks. He liked to walk in the evening. That was part of his keeping himself in shape. And he would hold our hands as small children, and we would walk around several blocks with him. And I came to realize later in life that what my grandfather was really doing was spending time with us and telling us what things he felt were very important to our lives. What is right and what is wrong. Although he wouldn't say it in black and white like that, he would tell us stories about things that had happened and things that helped heal the situation that had occurred, along with other things. He also taught us lots of stuff about the trees and the birds and stuff that kids need to know. I think grandparents are one of the most important elements in society for helping young people grow up and grow up with a firm foundation. Because grandparents have the time. They have the time to listen. They have the time to explain. Whereas our parents, and my parents were like most, great parents, but they were so busy. Both working at jobs, both trying to raise kids, both trying to take care of their civic organizations that they were in and everything. But my grandparents had time to listen, time to talk. So part of my ethical foundation, I think, came from, well, I know it did, it came from what the grandparents had time to share with me, tell me, and explain, so that I came to understand things the way I do. So I think grandparents are the best. And those of you who are grandparents, spend your time focused on those grandkids, help them get that firm foundation that they need. Okay. I'll revert this real quickly back to a sales example. I recently went in to talk to an owner of a small gym, and I gathered his insurance policies and took them back to my office, and I spent a little time, a couple of hours, going through all of the insurance that he had, because he was willing to let me look at his insurance. I'm still a salesperson. That's what I do for a living. And I look all of this over and I get finished, and you know what? This agent did an excellent job of setting up his insurance. Honest to Pete, I couldn't find anything in there that I would have done differently. So I took the insurance policies back to this gentleman and I said, you know what? Your agent is doing a great job for you. I wouldn't change anything that he's doing. So I'd hold on to him for now and just let me know in the future if you need anything. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to that point in your careers or when you're selling and felt like, I still need to sell this situation and sell this person. I didn't. But the end of the story is 6 months later, he calls me and he says, Mr. Turpin, my agent quit and he isn't with that company anymore, and now I need your help. So I was able to take all of his insurance and just move it over so that I would handle it. But if I hadn't been honest with him as to where he was, I'm not sure he would have come back to me. In every situation that I've had like that, where I was able to compliment the work that somebody else has done, I have always come through it feeling justified in just complimenting the good work that's going on, and leave it at that. And it's blessed me time and time again. So that would be my encouragement to you if you run into that kind of a situation. Okay. So where we find our trusted ethical foundation, you know, a lot of times that is your parents, could be grandparents. We of course find that, you know, some people find that in a church foundation. And some kids I know found it in the Boy Scouts and what they would teach, or Campfire Girls years ago. Those were good organizations that were helping put an ethical foundation under somebody. We should find this at our schools and in our public institutions. We should. So that ethical foundation is extremely important. It's important for you, and it's important for the people you work for, and it's important for the clients and the people that you work with. I've taught this class for, I think, 3 years now, different variations of this class, and I've never had anybody say that that wasn't important, or that the ethical foundation wasn't both important to them and important to the work that they're doing. I think actually it's who you are. Your ethical foundation is who you are. Now let's look at, from a historical perspective, who established our standards of moral and ethical perspectives. Okay. So from a historical perspective, I'll go through, half a dozen individuals who basically helped establish some of the standards, or many of the standards that we use today with both our judicial system, our religious systems that are in place, all of those things. And then I'll come back later in the class and we'll talk a little bit about how do we use those ethics as a foundation for sales. There are actually two wings of ethics. There are those who believe in ethical relativity, who say ethics are only relative to a time or situation. We call that situational ethics. And then there is ethical absolutism. Absolute. And those are people who believe there is an absolute right or wrong. Like it's always wrong to kill someone. That is an absolute or an absolutism. So let's start out with ethical absolutism. Absolutism actually evolved out of a religious foundation. You know, we see it today basically a Christian foundation or theology. These truths or ethics are proposed and came down from a belief that God wills certain things and those things are unchangeable. They're absolute. So we of course look at in ethical behavior start out with the Ten Commandments. and look at those 10 absolute things that both the Jewish doctrine and the Christian doctrine says these are absolute. You can't vary on this at all. I'm going to talk briefly about the Code of Hammurabi, who was a king back almost, well, right at 4,000 years ago, set down a lot of laws that later came down to influence our ethics and our judicial system. I'll propose for you the Golden Rule. And I always thought the Golden Rule, before I started studying ethics, was just a Christian philosophy. It's actually a foundation of almost every religion of today. It's just stated a little differently, and I have those. I'm going to talk a little bit about one of my heroes, who is Gandhi, and his 7 principles that he said were the foundations of his moral and ethical behavior. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about another one of my heroes, Martin Luther King, and his founding principles, and why they have changed and revolutionized America and how we interact with each other. So those 10 commandments, thou shalt have no other. They're absolute, just saying this is the only thing, the only way to think. Thou shalt not kill. That was what I was saying. Murder is always a bad thing. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Here again, that's what I was trying to get through my son's head, thick head, when he was a little kid. It's a bad thing. It never is a good deal if you steal something. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. I don't know if any of you have actually gone through a court situation where you're being sued, but you always have to have people tell the truth. If somebody's willing to lie about who you are or what happened, the whole system falls apart. The judicial system cannot operate if somebody is willing to bear false witness about someone else. That's why it was put down like 4,000 years ago as to, you just can't do this, because society will not survive it if somebody can bear false witness about someone. Okay? So those of you who are churchgoers have probably seen this over and over, and it's part of what we hear when we go to church. So Hammurabi was a Mesopotamian king back about 1700 BC, so almost 4,000 years ago. This king had the brilliant idea that he would etch into stone his laws. So these are not emojis. I know they look like emojis, but they're not. This is his code and law for all the people in his kingdom. So what Hammurabi did throughout his kingdom was he had these stone pillars etched, and then he sent them out to the far corners of his realm, so all the people knew what the 282 laws were on how and what was legal, and how to act and interact legally within his realm. So this is actually where, if you've ever heard the term an eye for an eye, is actually on this stone monolith from Hammurabi. Somebody takes your eye, you should take their eye. It's a little different. It's if somebody breaks your bones, you can break their bones, is what that law was saying. It was also the first time a law set out that you are considered innocent until proven guilty. And that was 4,000 years ago. And a lot of civilizations since, and even today, don't use that premise. But in America, we do. You are presumed innocent when you're going through some legal matter. Okay? There were 282 laws that the citizens should obey. Laws might seem hard by today's standards, but Hammurabi created those laws because he wants everyone to be responsible for their own actions. He wanted the citizens all to be fair. And the system can only be fair if you understand what the rules are. That original stone is now located in the Louvre in France. One of them that they found. They found one and then some pieces of others is how they figured out how they were positioned throughout his kingdom. So Hammurabi was a good guy. Things were rough back then, but he had a brilliant idea. Here's what we do. We write our laws down and we let everybody see them, and this is how you're going to act and interact as people of his kingdom. Here's the golden rule in different religions. The Jewish faith, what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow man. That is the entire law. All the rest is commentary. Well stated. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So that's the one we are most familiar with. But these different religions just say it slightly different, but it means the same thing. I mean, that principle of treat others as you would want them to treat you is so profound. And in any situation where you're working or selling or doing business with somebody, that should be your foundation or one of your foundations. All of these is an absolutism. These thoughts are, this is something that should not be changed. Absolutely. Here's old Mahatma Gandhi. And Gandhi lived an amazing life. A couple years ago, no, it was actually last summer, I was flicking through Netflix, like you do, looking for something to watch. And I'm usually looking at Star Wars or Avengers or something like that. And I ran across the movie Gandhi, which is 20 years old. And the Netflix thing said that it got like 13 Academy Awards. I mean, it was unprecedented at its time for all the Academy Awards. And I thought, I've seen it once, I'll go watch it again. But usually movies that are that old, I don't know, the rhythm isn't quite there, nothing happens quick enough, that kind of thing. I gotta tell you, this is an amazing movie. If you get a chance and you're bored, put this thing on and watch it. This man was just an unbelievable person walking the earth. He single-handedly convinced the British Empire to release in India and Pakistan to set up their own governments. He didn't have a military, he didn't have anything. He didn't have wealth, he didn't have any powerful position. He was just a man seated in the truth. One of the major situations that he went through, the English controlled all the salt that was sold from India. They took claim of what was a natural produced product, which was salt, which they sold throughout the empire, but they wouldn't give any amount of the sales to India. So Mahatma Gandhi told everybody, he says, we're going to march from where the salt mines are in the middle of the country to the sea, demonstrating to the English Empire that they can't control us. We are going to be in control of our own country, and if we want to sell salt, we will sell it ourselves, and we will reign the profits. We will gain the profits for what is being sold. He had estimated hundreds of thousands of people come and march to the sea in that march. And it was the straw that broke the camel's back for the English Empire as they shut down all the salt sales in there and demonstrated that as a people, they would no longer allow people to do harm to them and rule them. But Gandhi, throughout his life, these were his ethics. This was his moral foundation. He believed that it was wrong to have wealth without work. You can't just live in a huge ivory tower and have everyone around you give you money. That's evil. It's wrong. Wealth without work is wrong. Pleasure without conscience. If you go out just for pleasure, but you're not doing things morally and ethically, eventually it's going to lead to an evil thing. That is not a foundation of ethic. Knowledge without character. You can know a lot of things, but if you're not founded on ethics and principle, what you know is not good. It won't help anything. You have to have character and a foundation of character. Business, and this is what this entire class is about, really, business without ethics, like the mafia. Business without ethics is wrong. Science without humanity. Science may be able to do something, but is it good? And will it help humanity or not? It's like a guidepost. We have to have humanity alongside science, or bad things occur. Religion without sacrifice. Just professing that this is right, but not actually believing it and having a foundation there. Religion without sacrifice, he felt, was wrong. And then politics without principle. Boy, that's a good one for today, isn't it? Politics without principle is evil and wrong. Those were his 7 founded dangers to human virtue that he lived by. And it was part of the way when he said, I want you to get up out of your chair and march to the sea in order to support support this terrible thing that the British government is doing to us. People got up and they did that. Just an amazing, amazing man. And that movie is really good. So it's long though. You better, you're going to have to take a break in the middle of it. Okay, Martin Luther King, and today with the riots that we're seeing and some of the demonstrations, this gentleman is coming up again and again, and I am constantly amazed at what Martin Luther King's principles allowed him and his foundation of ethics provided for him to do during his lifetime. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. And Martin Luther King was a follower of Gandhi, and a lot of what he trained and taught people was in nonviolence. Gandhi, as Martin Luther King also, never attempted to harm anyone. Do no harm. And nonviolence was the way he got people to listen. He was an amazing, amazing American. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that's why people are coming together in the street at this point. They feel justice has not been served. Quick story about Martin Luther King. In 1960, a group of black students led by John Lewis filed into several stores and sat at the whites-only lunch counter, protesting segregation. Dressed as if going to church, uniformly they were all peaceful, polite, and courteous. During that sit-in, white hecklers attacked and assaulted the black students, dragging many from their stools out into the street. When the police arrived, 77 black students were arrested and later convicted of loitering and disorderly conduct. What's less known about that situation, and you may have heard that story before, is that those students practiced courage. They rehearsed their actions over and over again at a mock-up lunch counter while friends of King shouted racial slurs at them, flicked cigarette ashes in their face, and drugged them off their stools. The students had been taught Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolence, enacting nonviolence in reaction to direct violent action. They were demonstrating courage in the face of a threat. And one of the definitions of courage, courage is resistance to fear, the mastery of fear, not the absence of fear. That was Mark Twain commenting on courage and Martin Luther King. So it's amazing how a foundation of ethics and morals, when practiced, can create courage and amazing changes, both in you and what you want to change. So the other wing of ethics is ethical relativity. And ethical relativity, in essence, is purely negative. It is a denial of ethical absolutism. So it's ways you can get around what should be absolute. So a lot of times we hear the statement, a judgment according to the standard of your time. So it's people with the ideas we have today going back in history and saying, well, that person absolutely shouldn't have done that because of the ethics today. It can also be described one satisfying one's obligations or duties. It's okay to do something because it was my duty. You see this often in military, type of a military example. Somebody ordered me to do it, so I had to do that. Just respecting others' rights. I did this action because I was respecting others' rights. Or laws, they want laws to basically set the standard. So I can do whatever I want because it's not illegal. It's okay if I do this because the law is not going to prosecute me. There is no law that says I can't. Legality and illegality, in essence. So one of the sayings I came across in the ethics book was, what is wrong for a Frenchman may be right for a Chinaman, if that makes sense. Hopefully that's, well, it's not very PC, but it's what was in the ethics book. So I think you get the gist of what that is. I recently read a book called Lost in Shangri-La, and it's a fascinating true story of an airplane in the Second World War, just after the Second World War, 1945. And this plane, full of nurses, doctors, and a few military people, were flying over New Guinea and crash landed up in a high valley in a near a mountain pass. And so a lot of the native tribes in that area of New Guinea are cannibals. And they had to interact. I think there were only maybe 5 of them that lived through the crash, ultimately got to one of the native villages, and then ultimately were rescued. It's a great story. But they came to learn about these tribes that had never had any interaction with anybody outside their valley. They felt that the people that crash landed there were gods. So they treated them, like gods, bringing food to them and helping them as best they could. Now, they were also cannibals. But what they came to learn, the people who crash landed, was they would only eat their enemies. So if you were a member of one of the other tribes in the valley and you were killed by them, then it was okay to eat you. But it wasn't okay to eat the people that had crash landed there, so they were safe, at least some of the time. So there were all kinds of perceptions that these people in these villages had created that were just astounding. Your wealth was according to how many pigs you owned. If you were to have 4 or 5 pigs, you were the wealthiest guy in the village. So, just an odd sense of relativity and what is relative for them. But fascinating book on right and wrong, because I've grown up and learned things through my eyes and my experience. And then you read about these people, and it is just really, really interesting, the things that they had decided in their culture were okay or not okay, and how they got along together. It's a great book. If you have a chance and you like reading that kind of thing, Lost in Shangri-La. Okay. If you want to know what is moral in an age or a country, you must ascertain what are the moral ideas current in that age or country. Okay? That's kind of an idea of ethical relativity. I had a client at one point, and I was reviewing his insurance, and I noticed he had a Rolex watch that was truly something to behold. This thing was encrusted with gold flakes. It had jewels all over the front face, and it was absolutely an amazing watch. And I commented on it. I said, where in the world did you get that watch? I've never seen anything close to it. He said, well, it's a good story. I worked for a short time for the Shah of Iran. He said, I and my wife, he said, I am a head administrator for a hospital, as you know. He said, I was hired by the Shah of Iran to go to Iran and administrate his hospitals. He said it was one of the most horrible occasions that he had ever gone through in his life. He said, you don't understand what it's like when the laws of a country can take away all of your rights and your freedoms. He said, for example, I had an intern fly into Iran to help. He was a radiologist, and he was helping pictures, of the bones of a woman who had come in, who had broken somewhere in her pelvis. And this intern touched that person. Now, in Iran, she was a princess. You can't touch any of the royal family. So he got her seated right and took the x-rays, and then she got off the table and left. And then the police came in, and they grabbed this poor young man, and they stuffed him in the prison. And he said, it took me a month to get him released. And he had been beaten and flogged, and all because he had touched the princess. He said he had another couple working for him that were also from America who went out together. And in Iran, you can't be with a woman who is not your wife. And the two of them were shopping in the square when the police arrested them, put them in prison, flogged them within an inch of their life, and then deported them back to the United States. He said after his contract ended as the administrator for the Shah of Iran, the Shah's business negotiator came to see them and said, the Shah loves the work you're doing. He thinks you're wonderful. He wants you to stay for 2 more years. And my client says, I'm not staying for 2 more years. I'm not staying for 10 more minutes. I want out. And the guy says, no, you don't understand. You can't leave. You are here until the Shah releases you. And if you want something more, if you'd like another Mercedes, or you'd like a bigger house, or you want a pool, we'll take care of all of that. But you're staying for 2 more years. The guy says, I am not. He and his wife had to hide out in that house for, I think he said 2 or 3 months, because they knew if they went out of the house, they would be arrested and they'd end up in the prison, where he'd seen these horrific things happen to his staff. But eventually, the Shah's man came back and he was released, and he flew back to America. And he said, when I got home to America, he said, I got down on my knees and I kissed the ground. I am so grateful for the country that I live in, and our culture and ethics and morals that we have standardized here in this country. Amazing. I'll never forget that story. What is ethical relativism? Morality is relative to the norms of one's culture. See, the people in Iran wouldn't have thought there was anything wrong with what had happened to him or the people that worked for him. That is, whether an action is right or wrong depends on the moral norms of the society in which it is practiced. Okay. This Marukala Center for Applied Ethics is the PhD program out in San Jose, California, Santa Clara University. Today, in today's day and time, we're looking at, certain things morally and ethically and trying to determine, is this all right? Would this be okay? After the Twin Towers came down and the government set up the TSA, and they started inspecting us at airports, my thought was, well, this will only last a couple of weeks, or maybe a couple of months, and then they'll be gone. Oh no. Didn't realize this was a program that was going to go on forever. Okay? So everybody that goes and files through an airport gets to get patted down. I love traveling with my mother, who's 84, and they want to pat her down and try to figure out, her artificial hip, why it's setting the scanners off, as if any 84-year-old woman has ever tried to do anything untoward in that situation. But those types of things, we just basically have to decide, is this okay, and am I willing to allow this to go on and to happen? That's what the injustice and the protests are all about, a situation where, the majority have decided this was not justice and was not right. Another thing that's coming forward and has been presented is with the COVID virus, would it be okay to put markers in people? So would it be okay, moral and ethically, for the government to put a biological marker inside you to tell if you're sick or not? And is that going to be okay with us and with what's going on? Yeah, so all of those are examples basically of thinking along the lines of what is culturally acceptable and what is legally acceptable within our rights and duties. Would it be ethical to collect personal information on individuals who have not agreed to this practice? No, we're having that fight with a lot of the social media things right at this time, where things that people are purchasing or areas that they're interested in are being collected, and then they're using that information to persuade them to buy other things or to vote a certain way or any of a lot of things. And we have to decide, is this ethical or not for companies to do that without our approval? Here's one. Respecting others' rights. What about animals? Technically, it's not illegal to perform animal experimentation. Is it ethical? One of my daughters worked for an organization that basically did testing using, and I've used the saddest looking dogs as I could find, with perfumes and different types of chemicals and stuff. They would use beagles out there at the testing facility. And that's an ethical question with some people. They don't think that we ought to be able to experiment on other animals because they, of course, can't consent. They can't tell you whether they're, and a lot of them perish during the process. Laws set the standard. So Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote about the charge of the Light Brigade. Ours is not to reason why. Ours is just to do or die. Forward the Light Brigade. Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do or die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. Being compelled to do something even to go into your death is something that is a moral or ethical charge. Thank goodness there are people that'll stand up and protect or defend us and our country, but that's an ethical decision that has to be made if they knew somebody blundered, because everybody in the Light Brigade died, for those of you who aren't familiar with the story. It didn't end well for them. Okay, legality and illegality. What is the difference between accidental obedience and negligent obedience? A little bit like what we said on the military side, but it also happens. What would happen if the owner of an agency were to compel one of their employees to sign a document that wasn't their document. You know, that's going to put you in an ethical situation where you're going to need to hold firm and say, no, that's not going to do anybody any good. That's a really bad idea. When I was a young man, I was hired for a short period to sell pianos. And I'd worked there for, I don't know, a couple of months and liked the job. It was fun, and I got to be around music, which was great too. And the owner of the business came to me one late afternoon, and he said, I need you to sign this document for me. And I said, great, what is it? I was naive. I was probably 19, 20. He said, well, I borrowed the money for all these pianos that are out here on the floor. There are probably 15 or 20 of them. He said, and I don't have to pay the company for the pianos until I sell them. So I want you to sign this document saying that all 20 pianos are here. Now I knew I had sold 3 pianos and they were gone. And these were $30,000 instruments. So it's like, but sir, I sold, they're gone. They're not on the floor. He says, I know, that's just, don't worry about that. I need you to sign this or else I have to send that money to the company, to the lender. And it's like, well, you know, and I was torn for a short period of time. Should I sign this document or not? I want this job. I like this job. I thought I liked the guy I was working for. And I finally told him, no, I'm sorry. I can't sign the document. I won't. And I left and I never came back. But that legality and illegality, if I had signed that knowing what it was, that would have been negligent obedience. Although he told me to do it, I knew it was wrong. And were they to bring that back, I could have gotten in a heck of a lot of trouble. Ultimately, nothing came of it other than I didn't have a job anymore and I had to go find a new job. All right, still going? Okay. Okay, so in our ethical discussion, before I jump into WorldCom and some incredible disasters that we've gone through in the last 20 years, we also should probably consider leaders. Hey, the polls are open today and we're supposed to be voting today, so it's a good entrance into this, the thought about leaders. Should our leaders be held to a higher moral standard? Or should we hold them to even the same standards as the rest of us? Huge question going on right now about ethical standards of the people that are, especially in Washington. I think what we want is leaders who have a higher rate of success at living up to standards, these standards, than the average person. We'd like to see success in their life where their ethics basically propelled them forward and put them in a position where we would vote for them, is one of the concepts that came out of some of my research. Because of course there are dangers in following flashy, charismatic types of leaders. You know, for example, Fidel Castro in Cuba was a very charismatic individual. Hugo Chavez recently down in Venezuela was very charismatic and the people followed him to their peril. Or even Juan Perón, who was down in Argentina back in the 50s and 60s. All ended very poorly for the people of those countries. All right, so examples. WorldCom. For those of you who don't realize, An ethical problem at WorldCom basically crashed the world's largest cell phone or phone provider, cell phone provider, back in 2002. What happened was the company directed, and the CEO agreed to, encouraging fraudulent accounting methods from Arthur Andersen CPA Service. I was told that Arthur Andersen, who's one of the biggest accounting companies in the United States, they had an entire floor of the WorldCom building that was just accountants who worked for WorldCom. And it created, I forget, like 10% of everything that Arthur Andersen brought in came from WorldCom. So the CEO comes to them and says, I need you to change these numbers just a little bit in your accounting methods. And basically using their costs instead of capital expenditures, they were inflating their profits with a bogus unallocated accounts to the tune of about $11 billion of inflated value. So the stock market thinks they're worth 11 billion more than they actually are because their accountant says, yes, this is the truth. And it certainly wasn't. And their failure was the largest bankruptcy in history up until that time. Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, one of our more recent crashes, the economic crashes of 2008, a lot of that was on the backs of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. They're basically a federal mortgage lender. In fact, my mortgage today is with Fannie Mae, mortgage lender, to the tune of about $100 billion of bailout of that organization. Now that's a quasi-government organization, and several senators came in and looked at the books of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and came to the Senate and said, there's something wrong here and we're losing a ton of money on these mortgages and we shouldn't. And they warned Congress, and Congress, the controlling members of Congress at that time, just laughed at them. And much to the peril of the country, is that Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae were collapsed in 2008 and had to be bailed out. Papers. AIG was the world's, or at least the United States' largest insurance company, and they were providing mortgage bonds in the same debacle in 2008. They basically would write insurance guaranteeing that these mortgages would pay, knowing ethically that the people providing those mortgage in a lot of cases could not pay and were going to go into default. So AIG was their own worst enemy in that, and had to be bailed out to the tune of $182 billion in September of 2008, all because of greed, all because of their ethical or unethical actions during the mortgage and selling and creating these mortgage bonds. We recently had the college admissions scam, where some of our more famous actors and actresses from Hollywood paid huge sums of money to get their children into colleges where their entrance testing and exams, they didn't belong. Or in certain situations, they were allowed to get on scholarship in colleges because they were supposedly members of the rowing team or the volleyball team or whatever, and these kids didn't play volleyball and they didn't row. So that was quite an ordeal, bringing, and you'd think the people at the universities would understand that this is unethical and illegal, but ran right under their noses and nobody was paying attention. Bad enough that the parents didn't know what was right and wrong. I can't imagine my parents saying, well, son, you're actually too stupid to go to this school, but because I've got a lot of money, I'm going to get you in because it'll put you in the right group of people. So, yeah, that's not good on the parent's part, not good on the child's part, either one. Wells Fargo just recently went through an ethics problem with fraudulent accounts, where they were being paid, people who worked in Wells Fargo were being paid extra bonuses for setting up what were ultimately not real accounts. Thousands and thousands of them, which made the stock market look like they had a lot more growth and money than Wells Fargo actually did. I think it's kind of funny too, today you'll see ads from Wells Fargo where they're saying, we cleaned it up, we're good now, you know, we're honest and upright, so you should do business with Wells Fargo now. We don't do any of those shenanigans anymore, but that's kind of what I read when I see some of their ads. Professional ethics. So what is the significance of expertise within a profession? So and who is considered a professional? Now, as people in the insurance industry, we're essential. I loved that when it came out from the government that I was essential, because I was able to go home and tell my wife that I'm essential. And she laughed. She laughed and laughed. She thought that was hysterical. There are 3 necessary features that have been singled out by almost all who characterize professionals. So to be a professional, you need an extensive training, which is required to practice a profession. Well, insurance agents do a lot of training. You've got to get through the licensing, you got to do all of the studying, and then you got to keep doing it in order to continue to hold your licenses. So extensive training is involved. Training involves a significant intellectual component. Now, having taught the licensing exam for new agents for, I don't know, 5+ years now, I'm going to tell you, there is a significant intellectual component to it that you have to get through. Insurance is its own language, and you have to do the work in order to understand the differences and what these words and definitions are. So it has an intellectual component. The trained ability provides an important service to society. See, that's why we're essential, because we provide an important service in society. So made us essential throughout the COVID thing. But it was interesting to find out that there is no generally accepted definition of the term profession. I can't just say, this is the definition, as you will find it in Webster's dictionary. Nah, it's all over the board. But everyone seems to agree that in order to be a professional, you need to have at least those 3 things within the duties and responsibilities that you agree to. I can tell you that once you are considered a professional in the insurance industry, it will help you and it will help your career. If you were today the penultimate expert on, say, cyber insurance, you're going to have more work than you could ever imagine, because that area is absolutely blowing up. Employment practices liability. If you are the expert in the town you're living in for that professional, for employment practices, you basically would have lots and lots of work to do because of being considered a professional. Okay. Even an agency, a lot of times, if they take on a certain profession that they are really good, say they put themselves out as we are the experts in nonprofit insurance, and they hold themselves at a much higher level than other agencies, they will build a reputation, they will build clientele, that will help propel their agency. I know an agency up in the Four Corners area that has dominated trucking insurance for years and years, and they make a tremendously good living, and it's mostly based on just trucking and the trucking business. Although there's not a lot of trucking up in that area, so they sell throughout the Southwest, but it's great expertise, and it was a way that professionalism compelled them into a really good sales situation. So along with professionalism, usually what will happen next is the benefits of becoming a member of a professional organization. So this is where the ethical component of practicing over and over can be instilled in an agent. By becoming active in a professional organization like the Independent Insurance Agents Association, you will be held to a little higher standard, and you will also be treated to consistent information and encouragement to act ethically and responsibly, which, as we started out, like saying the pledge every day, will help your career and help you with your foundation of ethics and how ethics work in your life. I've been a member of several professional organizations, and I would recommend to you, try it. It's kind of like a suit. You put it on, you see how it fits, what it does for you in your life and who you are, and then you decide, I like this, I'll continue with this, and it does good for me. If not, you haven't lost much, a little bit of your time, maybe a little bit of your money. But that's an important piece of, I think, starting to practice ethics in your life and what are your ethical responsibilities. So, if I were to say of you ethically, that's not acting ethically. That's just following the rules. It seems like this is a criticism, and it appears to be an attack on the legalization or the laws conforming around something. Just doing what is your professional responsibility, okay, isn't enough. I've talked for a little while about professionalism, and I'm not going to do these. Professionalism will help on your foundation of what is acceptable and not acceptable, and you definitely need to know what's legal and not legal, but it isn't the ultimate. Of how you act and how you should act, being ethical with the people around you, with the company you're working with your carriers, and with the state insurance department. I like this. Nobody ever got a job by being completely honest on their resume. Make your lives bold, creative, and above all, unverifiable. So he's sitting down at the interview, and it says, your resume shows 20 years as a senior executive at the CIA. And he says, yes. And they are instructed to kill anybody who tries to check on it. My son, when he got his master's degree in computer sciences, he actually has a degree in computational linguistics, which is basically computer language. It's Siri. It's how the computer interprets words and then writes them into an algorithm, and he's expert at that. He decided he would go to work for the NSA. They had recruited him and said, we'd really like you to come over and do work with us. And they made him an offer. They gave him a folder, I think he called it, packet, a folder, something. And it said, we'll pay you this much, you're going to need to live in Baltimore, and we will pay off all your student loans within a 5-year period if you stay with us that long. And he said, yeah, that's cool. Unfortunately, the Q clearance that he had to get, his secret clearance, took months and months. He said after 6 months of not being employed and not being in school, all of his loans for his college tuition and everything came due, and he basically had to go to his recruiter and say, I can't wait any longer. Can you tell me when you're going to be able to finish this Q clearance? And he said, it could be a week, it could be another year. And my son basically had to back out and say, okay, but I have to go to work, so I'm going to have to turn this down and go find a real job that actually pays at that point. But the thing with the CIA unverifiable was what made me think of that. Consequences that you will probably experience if there is a breach of your ethics or responsibility. An agent who breaches his or her responsibilities to clients to behave in an ethical manner will be exposed to 2 types of consequences: personal and legal. So the legal ramifications are serious enough, but could you imagine trying to explain to your kids why you did something that got you thrown out of the insurance industry, or your husband, or your wife? I mean, the repercussions of unethical actions can be so extremely severe. I've seen this happen to many agents, not a ton. I think in general, insurance agents are the most honest people I've ever been around, and I've been around a lot of them. But on occasion, when it occurs, it can just be horrific for them. Depending on the seriousness of the breach, the agent may suffer anything from loss of a client to the loss of a job. I had a client at one point, a bar owner, come to me and propose to me that I lie to the insurance company about his operation. And my response to him was, the only way I can help you is if I stay above that and don't agree and do that. That gives me the ethical and moral authority that I can help you. If I lie, if I say something that's dishonest to them, I lose all credibility. I lose any way in the world that I might be able to help you. And he understood, and he let it drop. I never thought much of that client after that point, but even for asking me to do it, but that is very true. If you want to help your clients, you need to have a moral and ethical foundation so that you can help and promote them. I had the occasion once, I was a precinct judge for voting for many years, and I had a crew that I would work with. I think there were probably 5 individuals there to help with the voting that was going on. Now, the goal of a precinct judge is to make sure that everybody who legally should gets their vote counted. There isn't any Republican, there isn't any Democrat. It is the absolute ethic of you are eligible to vote and your vote gets counted in the election. Well, we had people come in, it was full, hundreds of people in there trying to vote, and there was a husband and wife who came in to vote, and they couldn't be found on the rolls. So one of the people working underneath me as the precinct judge took them aside, and what I assumed was going on was she was explaining that you have to contact the county courthouse, figure out where, you're either at the wrong place or there's something wrong with the voting rolls because you should be here. That's not what was going on, apparently, because after they left and I had time, I went back to this person to inquire what happened with this couple that were in here. And she said, well, it was obvious that they were Republicans and I didn't want them to vote, so I just shooed them off. Can you imagine somebody actually saying that? And I explained to this employee, that's not how this works. We count everyone's vote. That's why you're here. And so, I don't know, you see that kind of thing go on and you understand that, morality and ethics is in all kinds of different parts of your life. And it's very, very important, especially in our American society, that we hold true to those things to make sure that things like that don't occur. An agent who breaches his or her responsibilities to clients to behave in an ethical manner will be exposed to 2 consequences, personal and legal, depending on the seriousness of the breach. Oh, that was just duplicated from the last one. There are also legal consequences for unethical conduct, which can include suspension, revocation of your license, as well as lawsuits in criminal or civil court. So it's not something to mess around with. Ethics and morality in the work that you're doing as an essential person in society, you need to understand that that's very, very important. Okay, let's see. Nope. Oops, flash. This thing only goes one direction. This is different. Yep, that does sound like an ethical dilemma, Phil, but relax. It's only a problem if you have a conscience. That's just it, I think I do. Don't worry, I won't tell a soul. Another story about ethical behavior in the insurance industry I ran into. When I was a new agent, there was a nice older gentleman who was selling commercial insurance, and there was a big fire at a grocery store here in Albuquerque, destroyed pretty much the entire building. And the next day I was in my office when this older gentleman came in, and he was just in tears. He said, I'm ruined. This is terrible. I'm never going to get through this. And I asked him, what is the problem? And he told me, he says, the grocery store that burned down last night? And I said, yeah, that was on the news. I saw it. He said, well, about 6 months ago, they asked me, I'm their insurance agent, to double their insurance. And they paid me in cash for the extra insurance that they were purchasing, a couple $1,000s. He said, I never doubled their insurance. And I said, well, you know, you have errors and omissions, so it was just a mistake. He says, no. He said, I put the money in my pocket and I spent it. He says, and it's going to be the end of me and my insurance career, and I just know it. And he sat there in the chair and he cried. And it really hit me, you know, that somebody would even tell me that story, and he was sure hurting. There was nothing that could be done. You know, a lapse of his moral foundation and his ethical foundation basically had put him in a ruinous situation. So that kind of thing can occur. I also came upon a couple of agents that were new back when I was a new agent, and they discovered that the insurance company we were working with, our carrier, was great at motorcycle insurance. They had the greatest motorcycle program at half the rate of anybody else selling motorcycle insurance. Well, the insurance company I was working for didn't care if you ever sold a motorcycle policy. They didn't want that. What the insurance company wanted you to sell was life insurance, which we also sold. So these brilliant guys got together and decided, here's what we're going to do. You can't get a motorcycle policy from us without buying a small life insurance policy. So they were coercing the individuals who were buying motorcycle insurance to purchase a small life insurance policy with every motorcycle. Now, I'm not saying that motorcycles are not dangerous and that you shouldn't have a little bit of life insurance, but you can't compel somebody to purchase a product because they are or are not buying some other product. That's just not ethical to do. And they were fine until the company discovered they were selling all this life insurance, and the company representatives came out and said, how are you doing this? You've sold 100 life insurance policies. That's tremendous. They said, well, it's easy. We force them to do that when they buy motorcycle policies from us. And they were shut down as to doing that. Now, they didn't lose their licenses or their careers because it was just one of those areas that was a little bit gray that they'd stepped into. But they called that program Bike Life. And I've always thought that was a really interesting way to get something sold. You know, the foundation of you doing business ethically really should be all the impetus you need for selling what you're selling. You don't need a hook or something extra special to do that. You know, just keep it honest and above board, and you'll do just fine. So in our division between what is absolute ethic and what is situational ethics, I think you can tell where absolute ethics help with a foundation, whereas situational ethics gets muddy and creates an unclear idea as to possibly what you should or shouldn't do. A gal named Mary Gentile, in some of the studying I did from the University of Virginia, her situational ethics, which she believes are the right ethics to take, her quote was, "Ethics should not focus on what is right or the wrong thing to do, but how can I get the right things done?" So another twist on not just doing what's right and wrong, but even throwing that completely out and saying, as long as ultimately I get a good thing done, it'll be okay. I thought that term for situational ethics would be disastrous to try to uphold and to work through. Could cause a lot of problems in somebody trying to be ethical. So let's talk a little bit about sales and how things have changed, sales in America, and what's going on. There is actually 1 out of every 9 people working in the United States is working in sales. Now that number has not changed in more than 50 years. Back, let me see if the next slide, yeah. In the term between 2006 and 2010, the recession was, until our current situation, the largest downturn in American history. There was a loss of 1.1 million sales jobs. The U.S. workforce in sales, however, has remained at the same point, 1 person in 9 actually working in a sales position. And surprisingly, they did a lot of statistics around the world, and this is about true for almost every Western civilization. Whether you go to the Brits, the French, the Australians, about 1 out of 9 people says they work in sales force of some kind. But today, things are constantly changing. You know, the rise of social media, the way we promote things, the way we encourage things has really shifted. They call it the rise of non-selling. Many people out there, and the reason I started at the beginning of this class talking about, you know, what your perception is when you talk about a salesperson. And a lot of times you get this idea or this perception of somebody that's sleazy or is dishonest or any of those kinds of things. When in truth, sales is just sales, and it's part of being human, as that book that I referenced earlier was talking about. What they have found in that statistical study about sales is that roughly 40% of the staff that are working with a sales individual are also selling, and they call it basically non-selling. But what they're doing is persuading, influencing, and convincing others. I found long ago, you know, one of the best times to cement a relationship with a client is during a claim. When you are engaged and helping to make sure that that gets settled exactly the way it should have according to the contract, that's a great time to promote, here's why I sell what I sell. This is why I'm essential, basically. So, but it's not just the agent that should be doing that, or what we're seeing in most expanding businesses today is everyone inside basically is responsible for non-selling or promoting the business so it will continue and grow. One of the other statistics that I thought was fascinating is in America, 90% of American businesses have fewer than 10 employees. 90%. So the vast majority of people working are not working for Ford or Walmart or Wells Fargo Bank. The vast majority work for some small business person. So there's a lot of sales going on out there. They described some of the newer businesses that are out there that are growing. One was Brooklyn Brine. And this gentleman was a fireman, the owner of that company, and he loved pickling things. So when he'd go home after his shift, and a lot of times firemen are like on for 3 full days and they're off for 4, they're on for 4, they're off for 3, that kind of thing. He would do pickles, but he didn't just do cucumbers, which become pickles. He pickled all kinds of stuff. He did jalapenos, and he did okra, and he did. Today, if you go into a gourmet shop, you probably would be able to find Brooklyn brine, pickled whatever unique thing that you like or might want to experience pickled jalapenos for sandwiches or something. That small business became a multi-million-dollar producer, but he still doesn't employ more than 10 people working there at Brooklyn Brine. And there's a lot of that going on out there. Etsy is a good example of people who are in small business who love arts and crafts things. Predominantly, that's what Etsy does. Making their small product and then selling it and having it delivered directly to whoever is purchasing on the internet. A lot of times those are just one-person organizations. But there's a lot of that going on out there. And the advertisement of it really isn't a sales individual doing it. You're going to find it online because it's something that you're looking for that is unique. Or you like something that's a little more artsy and craftsy than what you're going to get at Walmart out there. The sales book also described another company that does not have your typical salespeople. At Liaison is an Australian company. It's an IT firm, and it sells software. And they like to tell everybody that they have 0 salespeople who work for them. Their organization expanded now. They're in 53 countries. And they describe themselves as just advisors on software. So if someone approached you from At Liaison, that company would look at the computer programs you're using and they would make recommendations as to things that would improve your IT computer systems. But they would not try to sell you anything. They would just say, this program will fit well here and it will make your operation smoother. So instead of hiring salespeople, they hired technicians who are IT specialists who basically just advise at, here's how to get your system running better and more efficiently. And they've grown to a $100 million company in about 7 years. So it's interesting, the traditional concepts of this was a salesperson is changing. And then how that salesperson is supported is also being changed by what the people around them are encouraging, informing, and helping with. What I've also seen, so think about this ethically, are you a salesperson or are you a persuader or educator? I've always considered myself basically almost in education because insurance is so complex and the words are so confusing to people. If I can help them understand the insurance contract that they're working on, they will make a good decision. Now, I also never propose anything that I don't think is in their best interest. So between me bringing their education and their understanding of what this product is going to do and how it will help them, and then offering something that I know is in their best interest, ethically, it's almost impossible to get in trouble with that kind of situation. It also has a sense of fulfillment. When you do something and you think, that was really good. I took a situation where, oh my gosh, if their home had burned down, they weren't going to have near enough money to take care of their clothes and their furniture or even rebuild the house. And here I've come in, and for the same money or less, I've been able to provide all the coverages they need. I feel good, you know. I'm wearing that badge of essential, you know, because I've done the right thing for somebody in an ethical sales situation. Let's take that perception of a used car salesperson. One of the examples in one of the materials that I researched talked about the disappearance of used car lots. There was a day in time, probably 20 years ago, where if you drove up Lomas here in Albuquerque, you would have bumped into a dozen different used car dealerships. Today, they're all gone. There isn't a single one. There's not even a new car dealership on that road anymore. If you go up, so what happened? What changed in there? And I'm using a used car salesman as an example because for years, when they would do surveys as to what is thought to be the most unethical business out there, people would time after time, they would say used car sales. Now, unfortunately, insurance came, just right after that. It wasn't, that far off. But the times are changing and how people perceive different types of businesses out there. The book I was referring to talked about the writer spent an entire day at a used car lot with 2 salesmen. They had 6 people come in to look at cars. At the end of the day, they sold 2 vehicles to people with extremely high credit scores. Incredibly low credit scores. In fact, both of the vehicles they sold had to have tracking devices installed for the lender to loan the money to even do the piece of business. So these were basically your typical used car salespeople. And on that lot, they only sold 6 vehicles. Oh no, they only sold 2 vehicles of the 6 people that came and visited. That perception of, pushy, slick, sleazy, aggressive, that type of sales, nobody wants to experience that. So, in contrast, my son actually was the first one, the computer guy, who introduced me to CarMax. I don't know if you're familiar with CarMax, but he went over there when he graduated, and he wanted to buy a Z4, which is a BMW go like a rocket vehicle. So I went with him. I wasn't paying for it. It's his money, but I went over there to look. And I was absolutely amazed at the experience. Not only was the place clean, friendly, encouraging, but from the moment we stepped through the door, they started bombarding us with information. Part of the problem with the used car situation is the used car salesman had all the data, and they didn't share any of it with you. They knew whether that car had been wrecked. They knew whether that car would run or wouldn't run. They knew what the experience reports said on it. You would come in off the street with no data, no information. So you're at an adverse situation where the used car salesman has all the info and you don't know anything about the car that you're attempting to buy except you like it or you've heard good things about it. So when you're in that type of situation, it's easy for someone to take advantage of you. It's the same thing with insurance. If you have all the information and you don't share it and impart and educate the clients to where they can discuss with you intelligently whether they should or shouldn't purchase something, then you're working at a diverse situation and it would be easy for somebody to take advantage of someone. Well, this experience at CarMax, they honestly just started throwing information at my son when we came through the door. They first, pre-qualified, said, okay, what are you looking for? And he said, well, I'd like a BMW. I'm looking for probably a Z4. They said, okay, we've got 3 on the lot. Here's the mileage. Here's the date they were manufactured. Here's the Carfax as to they haven't been wrecked or they have been wrecked. Here's the guarantees that we are going to provide for you. If anything goes wrong in the first 30 days, you bring it right back to us. We'll take care of it, no questions asked. If we'll give you a bumper-to-bumper warranty, although this is an 8-year-old car, we will take care of it for, the next 2 years. Anything happens buying this service agreement. I mean, it was an outstanding experience in a used car lot with them. There is no haggling over the price of the vehicle. They set the price. This is what it is. You don't get something off if you pay more cash or depending on how you're financing it. This is the price. They've established that. There is no qualms about it. And what I've found over the last 5 years, they're extremely fair about that. They build in, maybe $1,000 or $2,000 of profit, but other than that, which is what the business needs to run. You don't end up paying a lot more than that car is valued at in that situation. CarMax has gone from just someone with this idea of let's treat people ethically and honestly, one used car lot, to last year, a couple of years ago, they're a Fortune 500 company. They do approximately $9 billion in used car sales. I've purchased at this point with me and my family, I think 4 cars from them, all different makes and models, and have enjoyed the experience each and every time because I felt like I was being treated honestly and ethically from the time I walked on their property. I've also seen, because my son had a couple of problems with that car after he purchased it, and they did exactly what they told him they were going to do. They fixed the car, they repaired whatever was wrong with it. It was all taken care of with the warranty, or deductible that was provided. So even in the situation where the car wasn't exactly what he thought it was, they stood by it and took care of it. So I can't say enough good things about them, but really my point in bringing that up was the contrast in doing business between what is perceived to be a slick salesperson and somebody who's working from an even position. And it was surprising to me too, just to learn why it was so frustrating when I had bought used cars in the past, as to why I felt so disadvantaged, because I really didn't understand the value of the product or whatever it was that I was purchasing at that time. So So there is a rise going on out there in the non-selling. That perception of teaching, coaching, instructing others, especially in insurance with as complicated as it is a very important aspect of bringing somebody up to a level where you can deal evenly with them. Basically using convincing or persuading, not slick sales technique. So that way you were selling, yeah, that thing you just did, don't do that again. Really. Let's move on to a better concept of selling from a foundation of ethics and morality. Bad news is our customers hate us. The good news is we have a lot fewer customers than we used to. Insurance producer has one principal reason for calling on a prospect. That's to sell something. to offer a beneficial product or service. Producer must sell the kinds of policies that best fit the prospect's needs in the amounts he or she can afford. Target marketing. I wanted to spend just a quick moment too on making sure that where you're selling fits for what you like to do and what you understand. If you've never been in the oil industry, it's probably not the place that you want to start and focus. But if you are like me and you grew up bussing tables and as a waiter, that's a great place to work. You understand how the business works, you understand what their pains and the processes that they have to go through, or at least I did understand that until COVID. Now I'm not sure what all they have to do, but it's a lot to try to get themselves open and back on their feet. But if you're working in an industry that you understand and you trust and you like, you will also succeed, I think, to a larger degree. When I started selling commercial insurance a long time ago, because I'm old as the hills, I started out with gas stations and discovered that the people that were running gas stations in that day and time were just not the most honest people in the world. I sold a couple of policies and hated it. I didn't like the people I was dealing with. I felt like they were constantly trying to cheat the system and what was going on. So I got out of selling gas stations. The next thing I tried was auto repair. Auto repair places, in my experience, are some of the best people in the world. They would no more cheat you than anybody on this earth. I have found them to be great business people, incredibly honest, and a lot of them would give you the shirt off their back. In general, they are a wonderful book of business, at least that's what I came to determine, and to work with. So in targeting who I was working with, one of my successes long ago was fitting into an industry and an area where I felt the people really were working with me and I liked doing business with them, and I thought they were really, really honest, good people. And when I sensed that they weren't, then don't target that. There's a lot of business out there. How to build an ethical, We call final without qualification that which is always desirable in itself and never for the sake of something else. You'll have to think on that. That's Aristotle. Commitment to educating your prospect or client. Client's trust must be earned, nurtured, and consistently reinforced. I might encourage you also, if you are thrown a question and you don't know the answer, or you even think you might not be correct about something, do not answer. Tell them, that's a great question, let me research it and let me get back to you. You never want to tell somebody something and then come to find out that wasn't exactly so. And then have to go back to that individual and say, you know, when I told you that would be covered, yeah, I was wrong. And a lot of times when they're asking you, that's because there has been a claim. I had a client call me and I was insuring a 2-story strip mall with about, I don't know, maybe 20 tenants, 10 on the bottom and 10 on the top. And I got a call from the building manager and she said, we've got a scissors lift. I don't know if you know what a scissors lift is. It's a hydraulic platform with compressed air. Basically, you can raise yourself up, and they used it to replace signage and lighting and all kinds of stuff at this strip mall. And she said, we've got this scissors lift, and I just wanted to know, is there any coverage for the scissors lift? Well, Well, I don't know. I had written a policy to cover the building. I didn't give them any extra coverages for equipment or any
business personal property. I said, let me look at the contract and I'll call you back. So I look at the contract, and in the building coverage it said it also covered any equipment used to service the building. So I was able to call her back and say, yep, you have coverage for the scissors lift because you use it to service the building. I said, is there a claim? Is there a problem? She says, no problem. I was just curious. A week later, this woman calls me and she says, you know that scissors lift I asked you about? I said, yeah. She says, it's gone. It was stolen last night. It's like, okay. I've never felt comfortable about that conversation because it was such a specific piece of equipment, and then a week later it disappeared. But and I let that account or that client move on to some other insurance agency in the near future after that. Okay. The producer who remembers this basic rule is the producer who communicates to his or her client the reason why a particular insurance policy or program is being recommended and how it will serve. It's a very, very good statement. You know, I sold life insurance along with property insurance for many years, and someone was teaching a class one time and they taught me a great technique for holding on to life insurance policies. Part of life insurance is keeping that life insurance on the books were there to be some financial situation or somebody reviewing the insurance and moving it to another company. And what this individual told me, he says, once you have the policy sold and the people are willing to take the physical exams for that life insurance, he said, have them write you a letter. Not to you, but to their spouse or their children. And have them tell them what the life insurance policy is for. Dear, I've bought this life insurance policy so that you can pay the mortgage, so that you have food on the table for the children, so that the kids can go to college when they're ready to go to college. That's why I bought this life insurance policy. And then what you do is you take that letter and you put that inside that life insurance policy so they know and they remember, this is why I bought it. This was the purpose, because over time, people forget how important that one policy can be for them. So were they to go to it and think, you know, I don't think this is important, open it up, there's their letter explaining exactly why they purchased that life insurance policy, what it's for and what it will do. And you know, after I started doing that, I don't know that I ever lost another life insurance policy to somebody moving it to another company or canceling it, because I built the foundation ethically and morally. This is why. These are the reasons, and this is why this policy sits here. Yeah. I'm not going to go through the application with you. Aristotle also said, some of these Greek philosophers are deep. Now, such a thing is happiness above all else, because this we choose always for itself, and never for the sake of something else. But honor, pleasure, reason, and every virtue we choose indeed for themselves. There again. Deep thoughts. You can work through that. I thought it was brilliant, but I had to work on it. It wasn't easy to understand at first. Principles in presenting, principles in closing. Stand on your ethics and your morals as you're presenting an insurance contract. Make sure that you're telling them exactly what is true and the reasoning behind why this product will help and do what they need it to do. And boy, that used car salesman thing, principles in closing, I have had the best success in just allowing people just make that decision. You do have to encourage, you have to ask and say, please, I think this is the best thing for you, it'll help you in these ways, I'd like you to consider purchasing it. And then shut up, okay? Let them speak next. And in most cases, they'll make a good decision and purchase if you've done a good job of providing that insurance policy for them, ethically and morally, and doing something good for them. Avoid conflicts of interest. So as you go through your insurance career, there will be occasions where possibly you are brought in to advise or to quote on something where you have a center of influence. I would encourage you to be very careful in those situations. Say a nonprofit that you like working with, and you are lucky enough to be on the board, and they decide they would like to quote their insurance. That's a very difficult situation. I would, in those situations, recuse myself. I would put myself as an advisor, but I don't think if you're on the board and you're ultimately making the decision to pay you money, it's a conflict of interest, and it would not, in a lot of situations, end well for you if there is a problem. It's much better to be the advisor helping them make a good decision as an insurance agent than putting money in your own pocket because of a position on, say, a board. I'm not saying you can't, and I know a lot of agents that do, but it can have you can end up with a conflict of interest arising out of that situation. Commissions. Boy, I learned this early in my career about making money and how important it is. Not letting the commission that you're earning influence what you're presenting to somebody. Ethically and morally, you should always be working in the client's best interest, making them aware of what coverages they should have, what deductibles they probably should have, what expansions of coverages make sense for them, but not working toward how can I add extra bells and whistles onto this contract to build it up to a certain level. You know, the healthiest situation with a business is a business that quotes their insurance regularly. I know agents and agencies hate hearing me say this, but reviewing that insurance with another agency or two will bring to light gaps in the coverage. It might bring up other companies that offer other products that might be better or more advantageous for the customer, and it keeps the pricing down so that an agent doesn't end up just rolling on more and more premium and commission into the situation, which I don't consider an ethical situation for an agent or the business owner. I went into a business once because I used to work at this place, and the president of the company allowed me to come in and bid the insurance. And the CFO, the financial officer, said, "I don't know why you're here." He says, "We love our agent. He is the greatest. I've been here for 7 years and we've never quoted our insurance." My response to that was, "I'll be half of what he's charging you." And the CFO laughed at me, you know, and once we got through quoting the account and setting it up, I was wrong. I was 40% of what this other agent was charging this company. And I've always felt, you know, kind of good about that situation. The healthiest situation is sending something out to market every once in a while just to make sure you're getting the best pricing and the best product that's available. I've had businesses where I actually encouraged them. I said, "Look, put it out there and let's see what else is out there, knowing full well that I might be beaten and I may lose the account. But the commissions are not the most important thing that's going on out there. If they are, you're missing the boat on that. A life of money making is one undertaken under compulsion. And wealth is evidently not the good we are seeking, for it is merely useful and for the sake of something else. If you're only in this to make billions and billions of dollars, there are probably areas where other areas that you ought to focus your time and attention on. Not that I don't want you to be as wealthy as you want to be. I'm just saying it's not all about the commissions, it's not all about the money. Prestige is another thing, holding on to account which is prestigious, but let's say there are other issues with it. A lot of times those keynote accounts that are flashy and out there in front of the public and everything, there's other things involved. So be careful if you're holding on to account just simply for your own prestige and not because you're doing what's right for the client. Whew. The answer is yes. Yeah. I think that last one, we're talking about time. Always take the time to research the question, get through each and every answer, and make sure it's correct, okay? And the best thing to do, and I'm going to tell you from experience, go back to the contract. If you have a question, if somebody tells you something is this, and it doesn't sound exactly right, and I've had this from claims people 100 times, if you go back and read the exclusion, read the form, you may find out it's not exactly as they've interpreted it. So take the time, read the contract, especially the exclusions. What can you do to protect yourself? Rely on your practice of personal ethics. Keep repeating them, do them over and over so that you understand what to do and it's second nature. Purchase errors and omissions insurance. Right. Boy, I would never operate without an errors and omissions policy in place, just in case. Perform due care when recommending policies and placing business. That's another thing I always want to do. Once you've written a new piece of business, go out and go back through it with the client so that you reestablish that relationship. It's a great sales practice for you and lets them know you did exactly what you said you were going to do, and you'll be there when they need you. Be committed to a program of continuing education. You know, we have to get 24 hours of continuing education every 2 years. Focus it. Put that time and energy into something that you want to be expert at. We talked a little bit about professionalism earlier. There is nothing bad about professionalism. It's all good. It helps with your ethics, your morals, your business, all of it. Use your education to become expert at what you're doing. Prestige, influence, or affluence. And that's the same quote. All right, run this by legal, but sprint it by ethics. All right. That's it for ethics. You have successfully completed 3 hours of our ethics training, and I appreciated your time. Please let me know if I can ever help you in any way.